And that's how I say it's kind of changed and both saved my life, because there's no like right or wrong or shoulds or this or that. It's really about listening and being with your own intuition, your own energetic cycles, your own emotional cycles, your own creative whims, which I find really powerful and really, really, really invaluable.
You're listening to the Feed Your Wild podcast, a conscious lifestyle show about all things nourishing for your body, mind, and soul. I'm Vanessa Rodriguez, and join me for candid conversations with changemakers, exploring health and wellness, food as medicine, intuition and spirituality, and nature-based practices that will transform your health and feed all parts of your wild self. Natural rhythms and cycles. These, I believe, are the bedrock of health, connectedness, and vitality as embodied beings here on Earth. If we are nature, which we are, then the more we allow ourselves to sync back up with the rhythms and cycles of our natural environment and the cosmos, the more deeply we open up ways for us to explore who we really are and our greatest potential. Working with the moon can be a powerful way to do this. This is evidenced by ancient lunar calendars, the power of the moon to influence the ocean's tides, increased soil fertility with the full moon, with biodynamic agriculture, and, of course, the feminine cycle of bleeding, which happens to sync up with the moon cycle. So, how do you begin working with the moon? What does that actually look like, and what can it do for you? That's what Sarah Faith Gottesdiener began teaching in her Many Moons Workbook for the past 3 years, which have now become a cult classic. Her Many Moons book provides a variety of esoteric and practical tools utilizing the phases of the moon in real time to get you anchored, in touch with your intuition, and on your path with more intention and more results. In this episode, we dive deep right away into how to cultivate trust and build your own intuitive practice working with the moon, the history of suppression and oppression of people and magic, and how working with the moon has helped Sarah in her own journey with chronic illness. So without further ado, here we go. We have Sarah Faith Gottesdiener with us today, and I am stoked. So Sarah is a creative living in Los Angeles, California. As an artist, designer, writer, teacher, and tarot reader, Sarah hopes to provide inspiration and support through a variety of different avenues. You can find her online store at modernwomen.bigcartel.com, and her site on moon musings is at visualmagic.info. And we're going to cover all of that in the show notes and today. But Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. So my co-host, Megan Liebman, who joins me in our episodes that are called #Unfiltered Moon Musings. And those episodes, we kind of dive in. We release it on every new and full moon. And it's just about exploring the moon time and themes around that related to health and wellness. And we give kind of, clinical pearls and girl chat. So she first introduced me to your work a few years ago, and your Many Moons book has truly become an inspiration and one of our resources for working with the moon. So I am so excited to dive into this today because I have found for myself, prior to working with an actual workbook, I found that it was yes, intuitive working with the moon cycle, but it was also not as practical or tangible in the way that it is working with a workbook. So could you tell us a little bit about the Many Moons book and, what was the inspiration for this book, how you came to write it?
Sure. It's really nice to hear. I'm glad that the workbooks have been useful and have sort of helped, in any kind of way. I came to, so first I'll back up The Many Moons workbooks they come out twice a year, and they are a guide to working with the phases and cycles of the moon in real time. So one volume comes out in January and it goes until June. And then one volume goes from July to the end of December. And, there's a lot of information and sort of, like you said, practical tips, journaling questions, tarot spreads, ritual ideas, spell ideas from myself and a variety of different practitioners that I asked to write for the book. Generally, the practitioners have an area of interest or expertise or knowledge that I don't. So they are astrologers, they're life coaches, they're herbalists, there's so many Buddhist monks. There's so many sort of, different voices in there. So it's meant as a guide. It's meant to kind of help you along. It's meant to sort of focus and frame your own intuition and your own energy, through sort of the cycles of life that you're kind of going through. It's meant to be sort of a helper, sort of one more tool to put in your toolkit. So that's sort of what it is. How it came about was that I've been doing magic. I've been a tarot reader and studying the tarot since about 2003 or 2004. And I have been working holistically with the moon, meaning through all the phases and all the cycles of the moon, both magically and practically. And it changed my life. It changed my life. I would probably possibly also say that living in this way, living in moon time, also probably saved my life. And so the workbooks came about. I had been teaching this subject. I was a tarot reader, and I got a message from Spirit that I was going to write these workbooks. I was going to do it for 3 years, and that was what I was going to do. This was not in the plan. Like, I was not like, I'm going to become a moon book writer. It just was, I listened to the call. I take messages from my guides, from my higher self, from source, whatever you feel comfortable calling it. My intuition, of course, I take that very seriously. I've made some pretty large decisions in my life as a result of listening to this, this inner voice, this outer voice. So I just got to it and started doing them. So that was that, so that's kind of the shortest version I can kind of think of. Feel free to ask me any more questions, Vanessa.
Yeah, well, so there's so much there that I want to get into, but I want to start off with teasing out like magic and listening to that call and that information that you're receiving that is, whether it's being channeled through you or, you're receiving a message in some way. What I have found in my work and working with people is that a lot of times there's resistance to that, or not believing that there's value or even being able to listen. So I kind of want to, look at, when did that start for you? How did you begin to trust what was coming through for you and seeing that as, a form of channeling or, doing magic work? Like, how did that begin for you?
Well, I think like most people in the world, I'm a sensitive person. I'm sure you are. I'm sure most of the listeners are sensitive. We feel things. We pick up on things. We pick up on energy. We maybe are creative. Information comes to us in a variety of different ways. And that's sort of the way I've always been. I was always that way. I was always incredibly sensitive. However, I was not always taught by culture or institutions or school or anyone, specifically to trust that, right? To kind of see it as valid, to see it as real as, say, my house address, or, like, I think that a lot of times we're sort of, we put the power outside of us. We wait for someone to tell us what to do, or we wait for validation. If we can't quite prove what we're hearing or prove what we're feeling in a tangible way, right? So I think that sort of long story short, for me, it was really tied. I guess I'm getting really personal here. For me, it was really tied to developing more self-esteem and developing more self-love. I think that when we're living, a lot of us, our overall culture is one that it could be described as sort of abusive, in the sense that we're not taught to sort of stick up for ourselves or speak up for ourselves if it goes against the grain, or it's not perceived as keeping the peace, or if it's weird or different. We're really taught to kind of not listen to that, or not kind of speak in our truths and live in our truths, because they can be painful. They can separate us from people. They can make us an embarrassment. They can provide humiliation. We can feel shamed or ashamed if we say the wrong thing or say something strange. So on and so on and so forth. And we've, we all have examples of that in our culture right now, as well as I'm sure listeners can think of things that have happened in their personal lives, gaslighting, being told we're wrong. So I think that in a lot of us that accumulates, accumulates to the point where we don't know that we can trust ourselves. We internalize the fact that maybe our intuition isn't, in quotes, like right or valuable. So for me, it really was this process of loving myself, trusting myself, developing a greater sense of self-esteem, as well as developing greater energetic boundaries. And the most important word, I think, for me with intuition is trust. That unwavering sort of foundation of trust of what I feel called to be doing. If it feels like it's an alignment for me, I have to follow that in whatever way I can follow that. And that trust that comes with the surrender, like, for example, with these workbooks, it's sort of a perfect example in the sense that this was not something I had planned. This was not in the business plan. This was not something I was not interested in becoming sort of a spiritual self-help writer, if that's what you want to call it. And like the first printing of the book, the first version of this book, I printed 60 copies. I was like, I had no idea. I was like, I'd never written a book. I'd never, done anything like this. I just was like, okay. And I had no idea where it was going. There was no sort of like metric or business sort of plan or anything. I just was sort of trusting that what I was supposed to be doing, and I was to follow that. And I think another really important part I kind of want to bring up, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this, is a lot of times we're not rewarded for following our intuition. Like a lot of like in the beginning of writing these books, I got a lot of like hate mail and a lot of criticism. And it was very difficult, and I didn't make any money. There was like no money involved, and it was so much work, and I was doing it on top of running my own business and seeing my own clients, so on and so forth. And it felt really thankless, and it felt really like externally there were no rewards. So of course my ego could have jumped to, well, there's no external rewards. I'm going to stop doing this, or this feels hard, or this feels challenging. I'm going to, you know what I mean? I'm going to stop this, I want this sort of instant gratification. It has to feel good. And what I've learned in my own life, whether it's listening to myself around a move or quitting a job or, taking space from a certain relationship, what my intuition is telling me doesn't always result in like rainbows and buttercups externally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I feel like I've certainly talked quite a bit.
Oh my gosh. So, like fireworks are going off in so many areas. First, with regards to the rewards, I feel like and I see this so often working with people, it's like just on the other side of this shitstorm, it might be like, the calm, right? And that it's like, not that everybody has to go through that shitstorm, but sometimes it happens. And that process of trust that I feel like is definitely, okay. So for example, I just had this interview and conversation with this woman. Her name is Maria Benedetti. She's an ethnobotanist, and she does work kind of trying to preserving the culture of Puerto Rico. That's where my family's from. And she really speaks to the imperialism and the denigration of intuitive medicine. And the systematic process of teaching people that they don't know anything, and that what they're doing is wrong. It's, for poor people. It's for people with no education. We have these, medicines that work better. But really that was part of obviously a bigger picture of imperialism, right? And the business of taking on these different countries and cultures. And so what I'm hearing and what's kind of coming clear to me as you're speaking is like, the trust has been beaten out of us for generations.
You are speaking my language. In my upcoming book, the book that starts in July, I talk a lot about this. I have one piece called Deprogramming for Witches. And then I have another piece sort of right around it. This is the ratings for August is about shame. And you are 1 million can you remind me the ethnobotanist's name again?
Her name is Maria Benedetti.
Maria Benedetti is totally correct. Like if you start reading about any kind of history, whether it's witchcraft or herbalism or nursing, Western medicine as we actually know it, there is a strong link between, we talk about the witch hunts and, all of that. There's a strong correlation between this violent fear. And I say violent because it's just as you said, literally getting beaten out of us or getting scared out of us or getting murdered out of us or getting taken from us, used in different ways, so on and so forth. There's this real fear that has pervaded the globe of our own knowledge, our own remembering, our own processes. And it's happened across like every religion that I've certainly read about. I've been doing a lot of research or started doing a lot of research into Judaism because I'm Jewish. And one of my goals, for the next couple of years is to sort of merge my sort of magical practice that is pretty non-denominational, meaning it doesn't come from, Catholicism or Christianity or anything like that. It's sort of its own kind of practice with my Judaism and learning more about Jewish folklore and, Jewish shamanism and all of that stuff. And even with Judaism, there was a point where, with the Inquisition and the Middle Ages, where, Judaism was more pagan, like it was more of the earth, it was more of the land. There's the Kabbalah and there's all this mysticism and literally in order to kind of keep Judaism afloat at one time, the rabbis and kind of the leaders of the synagogues and the Jewish churches buried and burned sort of their books and their teachings of the more sort of magical or intuitive practices, because that was what was most threatening to the state and the church. And if people are interested in kind of reading more about this correlation between predominantly women's bodies, but I would also argue queer bodies or Black bodies or brown bodies or indigenous bodies, and this violence and this kind of wiping out politically and how it sort of still bears on our our life now as intuitives, as empaths, as practitioners. There's a book called The Caliban and the Witch by Sylvia Federici, and Vanessa, I'll email you it so you can put it in the show notes. But
awesome.
it just outlines how this is this practice. And I would say that we are lucky to be in a wave of remembering.
Yes.
Like we are lucky. Like I wouldn't say this is the awakening, but I find that I see it politically. I see it with people who even would not call themselves spiritual, but just like sort of reclaiming and sort of beginning to own and trust themselves, and whatever part their intuition comes in that's great. But I'm kind of seeing it across the board. This remembering, this reclaiming, this reconnecting with ourselves, with our intuition, with our own practices, so on and so forth. I'm sure that you see it too as well, right?
Yes. And one thing that I want to point out that I find so refreshing about your work is that it is so inclusive, where I feel like there are so many. I've worked with people who are, have their various religion and spiritual practices, but they could be pretty dogmatic within that. And it creates, exclusions and confinement for like limits for what they're capable of, because they're told, to be certain ways, or they can only do so much or whatever it is. And I feel like what you are also putting out there is not only totally inclusive and for everybody and anybody who's interested, but that it is our right. And here are some practices to help you to navigate that,
Yeah. I mean, listen, as long as it's not harming anyone, as long as it feels good, it's like, go for it, and that the focus that I have of inclusion, is very personal to me, just because I'm like a queer Jewish lady who's married to a mixed race trans person. Mm-hmm. And my community is very, my friends are all very different. They all have a lot of backgrounds, and it's real, when you read some of this stuff or you listen to some of this stuff, in, New Age community or whatever it is, it can feel a little bit exclusionary, especially like, I also have a serious chronic illness, and like these ideas of either or you're cured, or, there's an endpoint and then everything will be okay. Going back into sort of the moon, what I love about working with the cycles and the phases of the moon is that it is holistic. It does take into account hardship or shadow work or decay or vulnerability as much as it does brightness, abundance, working on what you're manifesting, what you're working on changing. But I think that we need to be really conscious about if we are practitioners or if we are people who have something to share. I think it's very important for us to think about who we're speaking to and if there's anyone we're forgetting. And then, if we're forgetting these people, how do we bring them in, or how do we provide a platform for them to speak, or for champions of that cause or that group to speak. So that's something I think about a lot in my own practice. And I appreciate you saying that, because that's like, I think I talk a lot about, or I think a lot about metaphoric paychecks. Not the actual paychecks that we get in our bank account, but sort of like the work, all caps, like that a human is doing. Yeah. And like my biggest paychecks come when someone says, hey, like I have a chronic illness, and I just want to let you know, like, your workbooks have helped me so much, because they're not like telling me like, if you think these things or do these things, you'll be cured, or, they're not, telling me to do things a certain way. Or someone writes me and they're like, hey, I'm a Black person, and I felt really, I felt like people haven't been thinking about me, or I felt sort of, not included in other spiritual stuff, and I feel included. Like, those are my those are my paychecks. Like, I'm like, this is why I'm doing this, because I don't want people to feel excluded. I don't want people to feel like they're not being thought of, because all of us deserve, all of us deserve to be spoken to, thought of, helped, guided, so on and so forth. And that's just a very important value to me personally.
Absolutely. I love that. And also, like, not assuming because of what, the person might look like or what you're seeing. So, for example, I have clients who they have chronic diseases or chronic illness and they're dealing with it every day, right? And they'll have like a family member come up to them and say, "Oh my gosh, you look so pretty today. You look so much better." And they're like, "Actually, I am crippled with like fatigue right now, or I have so much internal pain because of fibromyalgia or whatever." And it's kind of like even though that's it's coming from a place of, a compliment or trying to make them feel better, it's still like from a position of not really seeing them, because they're not creating that space for that person to just be and maybe share what's actually going on with them. So I feel like this is also such a big part of it, is creating that space for people to be and feel seen in the way that they want to.
1000%. Yeah. Just, to that point with people who have chronic illness, and there's this idea sort of that there's a better, like, or there's a period, there's an end point to people who are living with, and for sure we can, certain chronic illnesses can be, we can find a way to manage them better. It's about sort of harm reduction and sort of pain management, or having better days, or, these kinds of things. But it is 100% about holding space, and having compassion, and also listening, just listening, I think people with chronic illness or chronic pain, they don't need to hear your advice. They don't need to hear like how you would fix something or what you would do. That's something I certainly, through the years, as a result of dealing and managing and living with my own chronic illness, I've had to catch myself doing that with people. You want to be like, well, have you tried this? Or, this has helped me. And it's like, well, maybe we just need to sort of sit with the person, offer them compassion, not try to fix, not try to, move past it, just sort of be with that person. So I love that you brought that up too. That's so, so, so valuable and important. Absolutely.
Well, I want to get into moon time and moon work related to that. You had mentioned your journey and getting, the call to really do this and how it has helped you. So could you speak a little bit more to the power of working with the moon, and like, what does that even mean for somebody who doesn't really understand, who maybe this is totally new for them?
Totally. Yes. So I guess maybe I'll start really briefly, Vanessa, with maybe like a misconception, or misconceptions.
There's so many.
I find that a lot of misconceptions that I see about moon work is that it's sort of just new moon and or just full moon. Like, these are sort of the only times of, we call it like the month or whatever, that, we should pay attention to, when really, in my own practice or my own experience and how I've come to do this work, is it's a circle and it's a spiral, and that there is a waxing period and there is a waning period. There is a dark moon period, a new moon period, a full moon period. And within all of these cycles, which generally last, the new moon to the full moon is generally about 2 weeks in the Gregorian calendar. And then kind of the waning period is also about 2 weeks in the Gregorian calendar. Within these phases, our energy changes. And my energy might look very different than your energy, Vanessa. You might love a full moon time. You might love a waxing moon period. And for me, that might be exhausting. For one person, a waning moon period, when the light of the moon begins to fall away, might feel more refreshing and more at home. And it's a very personal way of experiencing these energies. For people who don't know anything, sort of a very super brief kind of explanation or more information about sort of living with the moon is that, we are nature, we are of nature, even though we sometimes forget it. Mm-hmm. And that the earliest calendars of human civilization were lunar. And as we began to be an agricultural people, we followed the phases and cycles of the moon to plant seeds, to nurture and water the crops, and then to harvest. Then we weeded and cleared out. And so it's this pattern that I sort of follow very loosely and very briefly. And there's obviously many, many nuances within each of those, of sort of seeding, watering, nurturing, a culmination, a harvest, and then sort of a recharging, resting, clearing pattern in my own life. And not to get super tripped out, but I will. This pattern, these cycles they don't always completely sync up with whatever moon phase the moon is in. Meaning I could be in a full moon phase or period energetically for half a year. I could be putting out, launching things. I could be teaching lots of classes. I could be sharing. I could be feeling really ready to be extroverted and to have things come to fruition in my life in a variety of different ways. Or I could be in a waning period for a year or 2 months where I really just want to kind of rest more and wrap up certain phases of my life and go behind the scenes and connect with myself more and do forgiveness work or do shadow work, and really sort of go into therapy or really double down on my meditation time. So it's about thinking about these larger cycles and rhythms and patterns of the moon as it relates to nature, as it relates to sort of our own personal cycles and phases. And what I love about sort of living in moon time is that there's no wrong or there's no right. Like if you're feeling really sad or sorrowful or down, the moon time says, that's okay. Like you're here to feel these feelings. You're here to get this out. You're here to kind of release this water. You're here to, there's lessons and information for you in this cycle, in this pain. Likewise, if you just want to go out all the time and you want to meet new people and start new things, that's amazing and great too. There's no kind of shoulds or a better phase of the moon, which I really love. And that's how I say it's kind of changed and both saved my life, because there's no like right or wrong or shoulds or this or that. It's really about listening and being with your own intuition, your own energetic cycles, your own emotional cycles, your own creative whims, which I find really powerful and really, really, really invaluable.
Totally. Beginning to work with the moon for me has definitely brought me deeper into like myself, like creating that space to just find out who I am and explore and meet all these different aspects of myself. And it also has been pretty like an instrument in my, I guess you would call quote unquote coming out as a witch, because I came from the background of nutrition from a scientific standpoint, although I feel like I always had intuitive practices. And then it wasn't until I started working with people and at the same time doing my work, my own work, my deep personal work with the moon and connecting to my wild, and that's how I call it. That was the point where I was like, oh my gosh, like if I combined these worlds for people who I work with, we could go so much deeper, you know? And so I want to kind of come back to, with respecting your time, because I know you got to go in a few minutes. But I want to come back to this misconception of like witch or coming out, you know, in this way, and how to help people feel safe in stepping deeper into this exploration of the self. I know that's a really big topic, but
Yeah. Well, what I would say is I love everything you're sharing. And we can go over a little bit because I also just want to say, I'm loving this conversation. I feel like I could talk to you for, 17 hours. So I'm super available to answer a couple more questions. I'm just like, wow, this is such a great way to start my day. So I'm so thankful to you for just
great.
Going right there. I'm so into this. Well, what I would say to people wanting to explore, their own sort of spiritual practices, I think a lot of times what I see people getting kind of tripped up on, or what ends up sort of stopping them or keeping them from sort of exploring their own intuition or magical practices or spirituality or their own sort of their own inner witch wild, ish of them, is the idea that they have to do this complicated, elaborate, like multi-hour, multi-ingredient sort of like spell ritual. You know what I mean? It has to be at the exact day of this exact moon phase. And I need this color thing, or, which is also why in my own work, I always just try to say, these are suggestions. Like, this is just a suggestion. You can do an amazing spell with just your body, just you. You don't need all of these tools. If you feel drawn to work with crystals, or you feel drawn to work with candle magic, by all means, please go for it. But, it doesn't have to be this, you don't have to go in the forest and forage for 7 hours. And if you want to do that, please, that's so great. But so I think I kind of would urge listeners who want to just get started on this, that just start small. You can start with a tea light and your journal, it doesn't have to be this sort of elaborate endeavor. The other thing tied into resistance that I sometimes see with beginning a magical practice is this sort of fear of I'm not doing it right. I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm not doing it right. I think if you feel called, whatever you feel called to do, whether it's dancing or chanting or listening to music or walking or meditating or free writing, whatever kind of practice you feel and flow with, or at home in, or drawn to, is kind of the practice that needs to be sort of uncovered more and needs to be invested in. Does that make sense?
Totally. That's beautiful. Thank you for saying that, because I feel like people can make things more complicated. And it kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier with the trust and rebuilding that trust within and in your own intuition. And that's a process, and it takes time, and it's not overnight. And I feel like a lot of the tools and practices that you include in the Many Moons book really do help, one to come more deeply into their intuition and build that trust.
Yeah. And there's kitchen witches and astrology witches and herbalist witches, and, there's art witches there, there's all kinds of, if your practice, if you feel like your spiritual practice or your magical practice is, making your own fermented vegetables, or, putting cinnamon and honey in a cake, and that's kind of your offering, that's sort of your spell. If your magic is gardening or planting seeds, or, being an ocean protector or water protector, I just think our magical practices can be so diverse and so varied, and that there's not this right way or wrong way. You can do a really tiny spell in the morning when you're sipping your tea or your coffee and you just sit for a minute and you think about what you want to have happen in your day and give yourself some love or do some deep breathing, like, or call your energy back to yourself. You can do little things throughout the day that sort of reinforces your magical practice and the fact that you are committed to living magically, right?
Perfect. Yes. And I hope to have Max Dishu on the show. Do you know Max Dishu? Have you read any of her stuff?
No, I need to write her down.
Oh my
too.
gosh. I have to send you her stuff. She is a scholar, a feminist scholar, and has written many books, one of which is Witches and Pagans. And she talks about, through the lens of international and indigenous lens, of women and witches throughout the ages and just like suppressed histories, basically. She has a website, suppressedhistories.net. You would totally jive with that. But she talks about this word witch even, right? And how that's been denigrated and kind of morphed into to mean something or to have baggage in some way. And so even when people just hear the word witch, what that can kind of conjure up in them, like conjure literally. But anyway, so yeah, definitely check her out, and I hope to have her on. I also, just really quickly before we get into feeding your wild, I just remembered, because as you were speaking, I was thinking dream work. Like, that's something that I've been getting deeply into, and my co-host Megan, and she called me this morning. She knew we were having this interview, and she said, hey, she's like, been in a fever lately, like sick. And she's like, hey, I had this dream last night, and it was Sarah. And Sarah came to my house. I mean, she doesn't know you, obviously, right? She's like, Sarah came to my house. And I was like, why is Sarah in my house? And she's like, and she brought all of these crystals, and they were carnelians. And she surrounded my house, and it felt so like powerful and magical. And I just wanted to mention that to you. I was like, oh, that's a good sign.
Do you want to hear something wild?
Oh, let's hear it.
Yes. So I generally will put one or two like little crystals in my pocket. And because we had this like Sagittarius full moon, which to me, I just think of fire, I had a carnelian in my pocket the whole day.
Shut up.
Yeah, no, Sarah, I'm not making this up. So it's amazing. And so actually, can we use that as an example?
Yes.
So, your co-host got really specific information. Yep. Her home and carnelian. So what I would suggest, and again, I'm not going to tell anyone what to do, but like for our listeners, if they have a dream or, they get a piece of very specific information that feels very affirming and really good, I would, if I were her, I'd go out, I'd buy some pieces of carnelian and I would grid my home or I'd grid my room. Totally. I would meditate with carnelian. I would write about carnelian. I would think about what carnelian wants to tell me, or what resonates with me about the color red or about the properties of the stone, and how I can embody that more, and maybe what my practice around that might look like for the next week or the next month, or maybe it's about energetic boundaries and about figuring out how she needs to preserve some of her fire and some of her strength, So I love that. And I love that you brought that up, just because our intuition can come in any way. And it's really up to us then to kind of take action and sort of do something, around that. So I love that you shared that. Thank you.
Yes. And when she shared that to me, I was like, oh my God, I had 5 extra carnelian stones from a workshop that I had, and like I just had extra. So I made a little grid circle for our interview with the carnelians.
Oh my gosh, I love this.
Yeah.
Yes. It's also just so, speaking of moon time and lunar energy, I feel like it's so resonant with this full moon that we had yesterday. So it's so like on point. So I love that.
I love it. Okay, so before we go, I want to hear what is feeding your wild. And you could take that in any way you want and what definition that is for you. But what is feeding your wild, whether body, mind, and soul right now?
Yeah, it's definitely been listening to other podcasts with like strong women, So I really like I'm assuming if people are listening to this podcast, they like listening to podcasts. So I really like Dream Freedom Beauty with Natalie Ross. I really like,
Love it, yeah.
have you ever listened to Health Fuels Hustle by Amy Koretsky?
No.
She's an acupuncturist and she has a great podcast where she interviews people. I also love just listening to podcasts where I am getting a different take on like pop culture. So I really love the podcast. It's called Still Processing. I don't know if you've heard of it. It takes on pop culture and like the media with like an emphasis on art, entertainment, kind of that kind of stuff. That's really, really interesting. And I really love this podcast called How to Survive the End of the World.
Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing.
It's by the Autumn Brown and Adrienne Marie Brown, they're both amazing writers and thinkers. And it's anyway, that's all I'll say. But these are, I feel like I've just shared a million podcasts, so I could keep going. But so I'm really fueled by listening to, other voices, other people kind of talking about these issues, these topics, these subjects. So that's definitely fueling me as I continue to ship out thousands of moon workbooks.
Yeah. Speaking of podcasts, everybody needs to check out your podcast, Ideal Futures, which is so much fun. I love listening to it. It's just like so organic and conversation and really important topics. So,
thanks.
Where else can people find you, and what's the best way that they can connect with you?
They can connect with me through my kind of store website. It's modernwomen.bigcartel, which you so wonderfully shouted out. My Instagram is a play on my last name. It's Goddess, Gottesss. And that's kind of it. My books are closed. I'm booked until the end of June, but people can hop on my newsletter to kind of know when my books open again for July and August. But yeah, there's lots of ways to contact me. So thanks.
Yeah, there's so much over there. Definitely hop on her Instagram. It's quite a treat. I find it so entertaining, and you share a lot of really wonderful stuff that I feel like a lot of people can relate to. So thank you for your work, and it was so much fun having you on. Thanks for carving out some time for us today.
Vanessa, this was such a pleasure. I hope that we can have another conversation. I really could talk to you forever. I feel like we just got started. So let's keep
I know. There's like 5 more hours.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode or any other episodes, please share with a friend and leave us a review. Your feedback means the world to us. I want to hear how you are feeding your wild. Give us a shout out on iTunes or reach me on Instagram at wildlyrooted. See you next time.